Good evening. Welcome to the show. You think you can judge new. Today we are going to have an interview from Miss Judge Mary. Good evening, Miss Mary.
Good evening. Today I'm going to talk about the Tinker versus Desmona's Independent School District case, which was brought up in 1969. Okay, so the issue that was basically about this case was freedom of speech at school. The case was about a young lady named Tinker and her friends who decided to wear armbands to school to protest for the war that was going on in Vietnam. And as they went to school, the school told them to take off their armbands because it was being a distraction to the court, a distraction to the school. The students refused to take it off, and then later on they were suspended. When they went home, their parents took the school to court. So when they got to the court, this is the judge's ruling on the issue. The students said that their rights were violated due to the Constitution of the First Amendment, which says they have the freedom of speech and press, and the school says that the students were making a distraction in class, and they didn't like that. So the judge listened to the case, and his final decision was that he sided with the students, saying that students and teachers don't shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. He also said that even though he sides with the students, he also sides a little bit with the teachers, because even though the Constitution says you have freedom of speech, when you get to school, it has a balance. Your freedom of speech is balanced to the school's rules. My judgment, if I was a judge during this case, would be that I also side with the students, because the First Amendment says that we have our rights as citizens of the United States to freedom of speech. We have the right to say whatever we feel like we need to say. Even though during schools we have a limit to our speech and what we can say and what we can do, the teacher had no right to tell the students to suspend the students, because the First Amendment gives us the right to do as we please, to wear what we want. So the students had the right to wear the armbands. Even though it was a distraction outside of school, it was not a distraction inside of school, which is the most important thing when it comes to freedom of speech in schools. If the armbands was distracting the students in the classroom, the teachers had the right to suspend the students and tell them to take it off. But the armbands was just being a distraction outside of school, not during the school. So the teachers had no rights to tell them to take it off based on the Constitution. I also say that yes, it is right to have a balance on our freedom of speeches in schools to keep the educational flow going, because students have the right to learn, and any distraction that comes forth, that has to be stopped. So if the armbands was causing a distraction within the classes, yes, the teachers had the right to tell them to stop. But since it didn't, they had no right to suspend the students. I think corporate federalism was being played throughout this case, because we can picture or say that the Supreme Court was the national level, the school was the state, and the students was the local level, all coming together to solve one problem. Enumerated powers were also used during this case because the Supreme Court used the First Amendment, that was a constitutional law, to solve the case and to make his final judgment. Even though the First Amendment says we have our freedom of speech, the Supreme Court used implied powers when they stated that even though the amendment says we have our freedom of speech, when it comes to school grounds, there has to be a balance. This case was very important because freedom of speech is a problem that schools are facing throughout the whole world. Students feel that when it comes to freedom of speech, they have the right to wear, to say, and do whatever they want. But when it comes to school grounds, there is a limit to their freedom of speech. And so this problem has been a debate between the students and the teachers on which is right and which we call freedom of speech. I think that the students had total rights to wear their armbands because they were protesting for their country during the time of war. And it was not creating a big distraction, so I felt they really needed to do that, and that's what they needed to do. The Supreme Court made a federal mandate that the school and students had to go through during the case. They said this is their final decision, and that was the final decision. Thank you for my interview. I was interviewed by my dad, and I was also interviewed by my mom.